We are recording.
Thank you. Whew, this is a conversation that has been wanting to be had. Certainly by me, and my sense is that from many, there's been a request and a wish for this kind of conversation to bring out a little bit more of what is often unsaid and unstated. And I would really just genuinely, warmly like to welcome every one of you who in body have shown up for this conversation and changed their timetables to be here and rearrange themselves. Hi, Viola. Hi, Marilyn. And I just have the warmest welcome for A, the subject, and B, for Moya, who is the inspiration for this particular conversation. And just before I go directly to ask you to speak, more than a hello, Moya. I think we should just say cheers to each other, actually. Cheers.
Yes, let's do that.
Let's have a cup of tea.
Our cuppa.
Where are those famous scones of yours?
Not here at the moment.
Well, okay, so this conversation is happening really for over about 2.5 years, a little bit more, maybe 3 years since I first learned about Moya, in relation to not so much death, but in relationship to her stewarding of a beautiful piece of land. Gabriella and I were in Ireland in 2014, and we did our first of the Irish-based singing bowl making workshops in a place where we were privy to meet an extraordinary woman called Mari Evans, who had some work to do in that workshop. And she crafted herself a bowl of magnitude. And she went through a big transformation process. And she and her nephew were deeply fired and inspired by the process, so that when we got to the end of the third day, we really weren't going to be leaving unless we'd agreed to the possibility of returning. And I think that's a truth, actually. It was very clear that she stood on that land and she spoke for herself and her heart and for Ireland and for those who she knew would wish to pick up a hammer and work with the metal. And she said that she'd really like us to come back. And we said there was only one condition, and that would be that there was a piece of land that would be willing to host us for the work that wanted to be done, for the work that actually would really like to show up and be fully present for the work of transformation that is possible within this instrument crafting. And she had no problem. She had no problem. She said, well, I think I have a friend called Moya. Well, I know I have a friend called Moya McGinley. And she has a wee place. She has a wee place in County Leitrim, which is not far from where we are. And if I have a word with her, I might be able to set something up. So it was over a process of months through which many departures were happening for both Gabriella and me. And when departures start to happen, new beginnings start to occur as well. Well, one of the things that showed up during that period was a constancy of death in my life. The constant presence of death as a small energy, as in what we could call the small deaths, the wee departures, the little deaths along the way, and some of the bigger inner deaths that are necessary in any transformational process. But what also became a very strong presence were the deaths of female family members of mine. And funnily enough, and I can say that at this time because funnily enough, one of those occurred at a time when we had arranged to meet Moya in the flesh in Ireland, due to the invitation of Elaine, actually, who's in the space. So I missed my first physical encounter with Moya at Imbolc in 2016. For I was called to Australia to be beside my sister as she was dying. Now, all along this period, having experienced a very close encounter with the death of my mother-in-law, where I would say that my energies were present to be her soul companion and possibly midwife during that period. Not that she really required it. She was spiritually very sound, but I was a constant presence and a witness, and he became a much beloved during that time. Whilst I was going through that experience with her, I had in my awareness the work that Moya brings to the world. Somewhere it was there. The work of Moya, and always the whisper of Mari. Somehow these Irish midwives were there in my background. You see, Gabriella is nodding because she remembers that I was always just a little bit aware of them. So I'm going to bring it all forward to the fact that we got to meet Moya in, was it May or April this year?
May. Yeah, May time.
And that was after yet another death in my life, another physical death. Oh, sorry, another two. Another near death. One was my own. And a few months later, the death of my mother. So Moya became even more interesting for me. I'd been trying to get to her workshop. Well, I don't think it's a workshop really, Moya. I don't have the impression that this is the work of workshopping. I'd been called to something called the Soul's Journey Home. And we're going to find out a little bit more about the Soul's Journey Home. And I'm very pleased to say that what I've come to know of Moya is that there's absolutely nothing miserable or depressing about this particular Soul's Journey Home. And how it really showed up was upon arrival in the place that is her land, that she is the beautiful, most beautiful guardian of, a place called Kosan Kuen, forgive my pronunciation. Is that all right?
Good, yeah.
And what happened was when Gabriella and I arrived on land that these bodies had never walked on before. Oh my goodness me, if I don't cry right now, I'm going to be surprised. But what happened was, a woman with a heart as big as the land itself, if not bigger, opened her heart and said, "Welcome home." And we were totally and completely, utterly and fully welcomed home to something that is way more than an idea of a homecoming, but an embodied presence of what it is to be full. I'm going to use to be fully alive. Is to be fully alive. And one person after another arrived at the workshop over the days that followed and had the same experience through walking on the land that is fully lived with one who is fully alive. We got to meet and be embraced by the energies of space and place that is awake to those that have lived there, those that will live there, and every other energy that does live there. And so, Moya, this will be a conversation that includes death, but it starts with a full acknowledgement of what it is to know you and what it is to step into shoes that really, really begin to know what it is to live. So from my heart to yours, I'm in total gratitude for who it is you be and what it is you bring to me and to the many. So I decided not to talk about where you've come from. I'd rather ask you. And I would love to start from there.
Yeah.
So, and let's just
Thank you.
have a
Thank you.
conversation. Yeah.
Thank you, Heather. Because you know, for me, this is my home, this is my land, this is who I am, and to have someone describe it in the words that you've just used is just, it's like, it's humbling, it's so moving, it's beautiful. So thank you. Thank you. Yeah, where do I start? You know, here at Cusson-Cune, I moved here 4 years ago now. And always, I suppose, in the back of my mind, or my dream, even from a young child, was to live in the heart of the countryside. It was always Ireland. It was never anywhere else. It was always Ireland. I'm off this land. I'm just, yeah, it's Ireland is who I am and what I am. And, you know, I suppose throughout the years, I always held on to that dream that someday I would get to the countryside, always involved trees, because, you know, the daughter of a forester, wanted to be surrounded by trees, wanted to be living in the midst of trees. And I suppose an opportunity, I got it was like an impulse that was pushing me out of where I was at the time, living in an estate in the suburbs of a town, working within a system, had my own private practice as well, but very much working with a system. And it was just like, now is the time to move, to go. It was in the midst of a recession. So I sold my house in a recession and bought in a recession too, and literally up sticks and moved across the country. And why here? I suppose I knew as soon as I got here, like I sort of had started, I was living over on the east coast of Ireland, and I had sort of looked from there, me moving across. Do you know, in hindsight, I think I always had to be in the West. Like my ancestors are from the West, both on my father's side and my mother's side. And interestingly, I'm between the two. I'm between Donegal and Mayo, so I'm sort of nestled in between the two places. And just knew energetically as soon as I got here, it was like, this is it. Now, you know, the land here had some trees, but not what I was expecting. You know, I sort of expected myself to move into a ready-formed forest, and instead I found myself planting a forest. And really, I have to say, since I moved here is where I've fully become alive. And, you know, those that know me will say that too. It has allowed me to become more of me and to flourish. And that's just through being with this land in a deep way than I never was before. Even though as a young child, I grew up in the countryside, but this was I walked this land every single day, and it was coming into a union and a communion and whatever you like to call that with the land. And moved here, so it wasn't just that, you know, open arms and here you are. You know, it was like that weaving of, okay, you know, that I respect you and you respect me, and there was a real dance with the land and a real navigating that piece, and in utter respect and love of this land, that then there was an opening and yes, here you are. Yeah.
And it's interesting land to me also, because it's not your obvious place for, you know, creating forests. It's very boggy. All of Leitrim appears to be quite boggy to me. And what you've got there, I've walked in bogland before and my body knows it. But that wasn't the energy that I was walking on and that we were forging in, and that we were, well, the midges might have something to do with that, actually. We did have a bit of an experience with a few midges, a few zillion midges. But there's something about the fact that the land opened itself as well. It's just sweet. It's a sweet, sweet spot. And so what I'd love to ask you about through that process is how it was that you came to bring more of the work, perhaps of what you'd come from. Because, I know that you have a career, you had a career as a nurse, but how that began to call in from your past to that which you're bringing towards the future. I find this a beautiful vessel to be with in a conversation such as this. What is it of you from the past that you left behind that began to be forged into this new vessel of your home, and your own soul's journey home, actually.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think ultimately you've just said it there. It's for each of us. It's our individual soul's journey. And that isn't just, it's not the journey of death. It's the journey of life. And then with death, into death, through death, whatever your belief system is, there's usually something beyond, or something to be gained in that journey. But I suppose for me, there's a number of things that probably, more in hindsight and looking back, that I can sort of say, yeah, they had an impact on me. Maybe I wouldn't have said it at the time. And things, a comfort around death and dying, which, probably until latter years I wouldn't have really understood, but I had an ease with death and dying. And that was, when I was a little child, I was most at ease in nature with animals. And now with my knowledge as an adult, that whole cyclical notion and motion of life. And as a child, I grew up in the countryside, and we weren't sheltered from things like death. Even though I may not have had it in a person form, but like with our animals, with even wild animals dying, like we were never sheltered from any of that. It was very much there. It was very much part of life. And then looking back for me as well, and it's only sort of in latter years that I look like, as a young child, I almost drowned in a swimming pool. And at the moment, or at the time of that event, it didn't really mean much, or I wouldn't have said it was formative, but I know I had an experience in that moment of having gone beyond the struggle of trying to maintain life. When I'm sitting at the bottom of a pool and, the fight is gone, and just there was peace and calm and stillness.
Oh my God.
And again, that's something that probably just lodged somewhere. I wouldn't have recalled it until, as I say, latter years. And again, there was a comfort I discovered in my 20s as well. And my great-grandfather was an undertaker in Mayo. So, there's little snippets that come in like that where I always wondered, maybe that has something, to add or to do. In my university, I did my degree in social science. And as part of that, part of my final year, I did a lot of work on dying and loss and bereavement. Throughout my nursing career, I would always have had an interest in that area. Even when I was working in accident emergency, I would have done extra study in the hospice about, loss and bereavement. And I was always called on and work for that role. If there was a bereavement within the department, it was usually me that was left, or allocated to that person to be with them during that, so to support the family. And then I probably created my dream job, and Claire will laugh at that as well. Claire's somewhere there. At some stage it was, I was doing my complementary therapies, that sort of was a long process through meditation and Reiki and energy healing. For me, working within the medical system, seeing that there's more than the physical that we need to be concerned about when we're treating people as a whole. That it's not just the physical conditions that we should be looking at. And throughout that, then it was, I ended up working in palliative care as a nurse in complementary therapy, and sort of dreamed up that job. And I was asked to go in and sort of set up the service within my area in my county, to be there for sort of 6 months. And 7 years later is when I was, there, and then went to move on from there. So I ended up working as nurse in complementary therapy in palliative care. So that was my work at that stage. And then again, it was, I loved my job. I loved my work. I loved being with people in that very sacred and special space. But again, it was a system, and we're constrained a lot of the time by systems. And I found myself wanting more, and wanting to be free of the structure and the bounds. And that brought my move across, and my move to here. And just, it probably opened up a freedom, as I said there when I started, to be more of me and bring more of me to my work. without the constraints and the structures of a system. Yeah, and then the soul's journey work, you know, it was probably brewing somewhere throughout my life. You know, if I'm honest about that. Yeah. Somewhere there was someone with a string or a spoon.
Yeah. I think in Ireland you would refer to that particular midwife as being perhaps Bridget and her cauldron, yeah, cooking up that
who knows, the Cailleach, who knows? Somewhere. And it was actually my colleagues that I had left back in palliative care that asked me, some of them had been doing, you know, a very interesting course in the hospice and a very good course, but it was very theory-based and theoretical and big group, big numbers. And they asked me, would I do something on a more experiential level? And Claire actually was one of those people. Actually, Claire was one of the first people that did the weekend with me. And it really went from there. I mean, it started as probably quite a structured weekend, even though with me, nothing is ever going to be too structured. You know, that we would look at, you know, the soul's journey and look at it from a very spirit perspective. But also look then how we can help someone during those latter days, you know, with whether it be music or meditation or poetry or reading, or, you know, how could we be part of that or be at ease with it? And even the weekends have evolved. I mean, it was always experiential. For me, it is about having an experience with and of death. And, you know, Heather, as I said to you, I don't see myself as an expert in this field. That isn't who I am. But it's like death, my friend, my companion, that I know and that I can call on to allow us to have the experience of this energy. And it has been that energy that has so informed my living. Because if you've death by your side at every step, you just embrace life. And that was what happened out of those weekends, and which has been amazing. You know, the biggest thing that people will say, even though they came to, shall we say, be with death, what they left with is being so fully alive that they, you know, even made massive changes in their lives, that all of a sudden it was like, I can't continue to live maybe some of the things that weren't working in their lives. And that we maybe choose a different way of being, a different way of living, a more full, embodied, happy, beautiful way of life, because we've danced with death and we've been with death. Yeah.
Danced with death. I mean, it's kind of something in our matching mugs. There are some cultures who actually will be willing to show us what it is to celebrate the energies of death and acknowledge, even if it's only one day a year. I wanted to ask you two questions just in that, but just now it occurred to me that you've got this favorite piece of John O'Donoghue's, which actually sums that up so beautifully. I mean, would you share it with us?
Yes, I would. Of course, I would. Will I read it all, Heather?
Oh, I actually would like to. I'd like to say yes.
Okay.
I read it from halfway through, and I thought, no, let's do the whole thing.
Okay. So this is one of John O'Donoghue, I suppose, for people who don't know him. I'm surprised if probably most people will know him. We claim him here in Ireland as one of our mystics and poets. And he writes beautifully about, for me, everything's energy, so about the energies of different aspects. So this is one of his writings for the dying. So, may death come gently towards you, leaving you time to make your way through the cold embrace of fear to the place of inner tranquility. May death arrive only after a long life to find you at home among your own with every comfort and care you require. May your leave-taking be gracious, enabling you to hold dignity through awkwardness and illness. May you see the reflection of your life's kindness and beauty in all the tears that fall for you. As your eyes focus on each face, may your soul take its imprint, drawing each image within as companions for the journey. May you find for each one you love a different locket of jeweled words to be worn around the heart to warm your absence. May someone who knows and loves the complex village of your heart be there to echo you back to yourself and create a sure word raft to carry you to the further shore. May your spirit feel the surge of true delight when the veil of the visible is raised and you glimpse again the living faces of departed family and friends. May there be some beautiful surprise waiting for you inside death, something you never knew or felt, which with one simple touch absolves you of all loneliness and loss, as you quicken within the embrace for which your soul was eternally made. May your heart be speechless at the sight of the truth of all your belief had hoped, your heart breathless in the light and lightness where each and everything is at last its true self, within that serene belonging that dwells beside us on the other side of what we see.
I love the reference to the complex space of the heart.
Mm-hmm.
It's as though more of me in existence is acknowledged in that one line. It can be complex. It's a rich place. And he just, right there in the center of that exquisite gift, is this moment where I feel completely met.
Yeah.
And then I feel accompanied in whatever follows. And thank you so much for reading it, Moya.
Mm.
And
it's beautiful. For me, it's just, it sums up everything that I've come to learn about death and from death. And for me, and I use that wee piece about it, may someone be there to carry you. And for me, that's so important. And it's one of our big traditions here in Ireland, that the midwife of the soul, and it could be the Shan band that they were called, or the Banfasa, like the wise woman. And it wasn't wise woman in a learned way. It was someone who was comfortable and familiar with the ways of the world and the ways of living and dying. And for me, wouldn't it be beautiful for someone like that to be present with you, not in a doing, fixing, medicating way, but in a way that someone can be so present with you that you don't need to speak, that they can feel into what you need or what you don't need. And again, it's not about doing. This is a place of being. It's a place of knowing and knowingness in that moment exactly what is needed and what needs to happen. Or
totally. I mean, exactly what I could never have anticipated the gift that being willing to be that energy for my mother-in-law, Maggie, during the 11 days that ended up being the last 11 days of her life. I would never have been willing to acknowledge what an incredibly, utterly beautiful space it is to allow yourself to go, or to allow myself to be so fully present. But it was a journey that we had to take with each other over a number of years, because to be fully present with her meant that, in my instance, I had to surrender any particular view of how it should go.
Mm-hmm.
And I arrived back in London, kind of homeless after, one of the big departures that I'd referred to. And having gone through a very, really rich 4 or 5 months of traveling, emptying, and then a glorious 5 days of a big class with the work of Access Consciousness, I was open, I was empty, and I was available. And I really do feel that this is a quality that is naturally within us, but is not always available.
Mm-hmm.
And where I could go in a number of directions with that. I could say, what in your view does it take? and I'm not asking you to be the expert, but I am asking you as somebody who's witnessed and assisted the many, what does it take for somebody to be willing to be a witness presence whereby our bodies get to inform us of what the body that we're with is asking for in any moment? For that's actually what I experienced. Can you speak to that a little?
Yeah, and I think there's a number of things there as well, because, I smiled when you said, when you're with your family, it's really, really difficult. I have to say, it's probably one of the most challenging, of anything, because, our families are the ones that bring up all our emotional residue and all of our reactions and attachments. And, so it's in my experience, it's probably easier to be with someone who you're not as close to and close with. I think it's a beautiful gift to be there for family. But it's probably something to keep in mind, because even when we speak about presence, it can be very difficult to be fully present when it's a family member or someone that pushes your buttons all the time and but the presence for me, when we speak about this even in our weekends and the work that I do, like, what does it mean to be fully present?
Yeah,
and for me, it's it goes beyond even a thinking, a headspace. It's a way of being. And for me, it's always about a heart connection. And, I've spoken to over the years about this. For me, this I have learned most beautifully from my animal work. Because it's the heart connection, where you leave the thinking, that the head, you leave the agendas, you leave expectations. It's all about just pure heart. I'm not there for a purpose. I'm not there to do. I'm there purely to receive and to listen, to listen in a sensing way. So to listen with all of my body and feeling and my energetic body, so that I can pick up on the subtleties that we wouldn't if we're in our thinking mind. And to be in that space, it takes practice. And, again, at weekends or two, we often have to, like, why do we meditate, or why do we do our disciplines? Whatever your discipline is, and it may not be meditation, it may be being in nature, it may be, your mindfulness, whatever it is, like, why do we practice something? And we practice so that we can go into a space. And for me, it's about getting out of the head. And I don't mean getting out of the head in a, that the head is wrong. We have to keep our heads on us, because we do have to interpret what we're feeling. We have to be able to speak and interact and engage. But it's getting out of our thinking, chattering mind, so that we're not putting an agenda or expectations, so that we can be in a place of its openness, its non-judgment, its compassion. It's a very much, I call it a heart space. And it's, as I say, it's what I know from my animal work. It's just a vast openness where you are then able to notice and receive what is needed.
Magical word. You're saying listening from the space of receiving, rather than listening from the space of that which would be only accessible audibly or through the intelligence that we know as a thinking process. Being receptive is like, are we willing completely to be in the receiving space around somebody who is potentially going through a great deal of pain?
Yes,
that's a potential. It's not that the energies of their willingness to walk. What a cliche. Walk towards death at that moment. I mean, it's not likely that they're going to be walking, but the willingness that they have to be in the receiving of what is coming towards them. That's a key piece as well. And to.
But I mean, Heather, you say walk there, and I know we sort of, that term maybe isn't.
Yeah, it's a cliche.
It is, but yet, if we look at all of our traditions, and this is, I was sort of diving into the soul side of things, or the spirit side of things. If we look at any of our traditions, both our Celtic traditions, it's always about the soul moving. So there is movement. If we look at the Tibetan Book of Dying, it's the movement through the bardo. It's like all of our prayers are move on, move on, move on. So there is movement, and I think that's an important piece. But also important to remember is, in order for the soul to move, we need to let go of the emotions and the attachments. So if we can be in that place of pure presence, it helps the soul and the spirit of ourselves or of somebody else to move, to let go, to move away or to move on from. And it's one of the ways that we can really assist someone who maybe is in pain or suffering. By us being a particular frequency of energy, it can assist them in the letting go and the moving on. And I think that's important. Because, it might not be walking, but it is moving. And that's across all the traditions. There's always a moving. And it's an interesting one just to sort of look at, that there's a movement needed.
Well, there is a single moment in the living. There is not a single moment in living that is not in movement.
In movement.
I mean, there's nothing. There's nothing in our lives that is not in continual movement. And to be able to access the depth of stillness that's available within the movement.
Yeah.
As you say beautifully, Moya, it is a practice. It is a practice. But for me, this phrase, personally, a practice is something that I stitched myself up in and made it a kind of a, oh my God, a form, a structure. It's full of rules, the practice of having to sit on the cushion and meditate in the right way. But this kind of practice, this is the practice of the willingness to be present with, in my world, whatever shows up, with whatever shows up.
Absolutely.
And
not to get scattered with whatever shows up. And that's the still. If we can maintain our calm and still point, because if the torture and anguish that can show up in someone's dying, but if we get emotionally involved in that, we are of no benefit. So our practice is a practice of being at one, at still, whatever you call it, and I'm using various words here because, depending on your practice, it will be different words. It'll be a different form of practice. And it doesn't have to be that you sit and meditate for hours. My practice now is I sit and be with a tree. I can sit and be with an animal. All of that is practicing stillness, awareness, being present, being in the moment. So it becomes a way of being, and we practice the way of being.
Lovely. Are you familiar, Moya, with the work of, I think it's probably right to say it's the work of Tom Brown or John Young. These are teachers from America who've worked with the indigenous people, and one of their practices is to create a sit spot.
Yes.
And that's, I think, it was a fundamental turning point for me to recognize that there could be a place on the earth somewhere, even, within 10 minutes of my front door, wherever I lived, that would allow me to enter into a living engagement with the stillness, but it was a very engaged space. And to do that on a day. Are you familiar with that work of the sit spot?
Yeah, I do, yeah. But, even beyond that, my belief here is like every place can be a sit spot. Like every space is a sacred space. And it's about our connection with that space more than the space. People can get caught in having to go to a particular location to be in this way of being. Yeah. And for me, it's not about that. It's about my way of being connects to that space wherever I am. I don't know whether I understand what I'm saying. And I think we have to, it is every space is sacred. Hear me sitting on this sofa is a sacred space, because this space between us, we're in that very present, aware, alert space.
And would you say that you arrived there, or did you start? I mean, have you got to that place where you can be with the sacredness of everything, the communion-based existence, or did you actually have to arrive there?
Oh yeah, I arrived, and I'm not there, Heather.
But you know it. You know the energies of it, and that's,
in case anyone gets any illusions, I'm not there.
no. But
But
Moya,
it's, you know, as humans, we have to be in and out of different energies,
yeah.
and that's what being human is, and you know, we need to embrace that too. You know, I think we'd be enlightened being somewhere else if we were that present all the time. You know,
Oh God! I just want to burst forth and say, absolutely. I mean, given this idea of the enlightenment is a singular state of being, is something that fixes it in place. Like we would have to get there, and that's it. But
yes.
what we all know, I think, what we're all beginning to live and experience in so many more ways, is that presence is available all the time. It's actually fundamentally it's a choice, but sometimes we have to choose to get through some of the detritus that would stop that. And there it is.
And bringing that into your everyday, you know, and this is you know, people in mindfulness would be very familiar with that, but that, you know, every task and every chore is sacred in whatever way, you know, and it's like, you know, I sometimes say, and I find a mantra that I say oftentimes, you know, each step my first, each step my last, each breath my first, each breath my last. You know, so there's that acknowledgement of how precious is this one breath, because, you know, it's my first and it's my last. The same with each step.
Oh my God. I mean, that in itself, that seems to me to be a real giveaway to, you know, I mean, well, to that moment of how to breathe in a way that life is always walking with death alongside it, and nothing is significant about either. Nothing.
No.
Either.
But you know, I'm struck because it's I have my look. I have my U stick here. You know my U stick, and I don't know whether that's the U. It's part of the Om wood. And this is a real Celtic. The Om was an old system of lettering here in Ireland. And each sort of lettering, these are the letterings here that I don't know whether you can see that very clearly. They're sort of lines and dashes. And they correspond to woods. But this is the U. And in our ancestors here, it's a Celtic ancestry too, and in Ireland, the U is death and birth. They're not separate, so it's you can't have one without the other, you know. And it's the cyclical nature of things, that death and birth, it's one seamless thing, or one seamless entity, you know. And there is a new beginning tree, like the birch, the beh is a new beginning, but the U is death and rebirth, you know. And I always think, God, yeah, there's something in that too. When we look to the old wisdom, they knew these things. That we're remembering and maybe relearning in a way. Regathering that knowledge, that wisdom.
And again, in that word, remembering, what are we doing? We're beginning to re-establish perhaps a different kind of knowing of who it is, where we come from, what it is that's available to us here. There's a stilling in that remembering. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
The other thing about the U is quite interesting. I remember I've sat with many U's along the way in these last years, but what comes to mind is that from one U underground, the roots are continually reaching and producing new members of its own community. So that's a very interesting moment of not just the death and the rebirth, which is kind of almost a categorical, but there's this within the taproot system of those U forests is just, they are so interdependent and interconnected, and they're aware of themselves in the space of the community, it seems.
Yeah. And the U tree, as you said, that it's perfect. It dies and regrows. That's how it lives. The other thing that's interesting too, on a medicinal level, you know, the yew tree is highly toxic, which, you know, I sort of go, well, here's the tree that could kill you. Do you know, if you were to eat that tree, and particularly for animal and livestock, they will die. Do you know, so it's all interwoven in in every aspect of it.
If you've got a yew hedge, which has gone into berries, because I live near one, there are various pharmaceutical bodies that will pay you very generously to have the berries harvested at a certain time of the year. For I believe that medicine actually goes to creating heart medicine.
Heart medicine
Of a particular. I'm sorry, I'm not much.
Yew tree is used for taxus is used for cancer treatment.
Cancer, yeah.
Chemo.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Gabrielle.
That's good to hear. And it's the yew tree has the ability, if we don't cut it, it lives forever. It just grows more and more. It becomes a whole grove, and the grove becomes a larger grove and a larger grove, and the first tree kind of dies, but it grows from its branches, and the branches root again, and then they come back up again. It's very different to any other tree. It has a capacity to regenerate itself from its branches that is completely different to any other tree.
How interesting then that it is actually a medicine that's used for cancer treatment, given that the cancer cells grow in that same way. Yeah. They're just abundant in the right conditions for them. How interesting.
Yeah, it's like very small, like a homeopathic, and really, really small doses, like creating the opposite. Really interesting. I agree with you. Yeah.
Moya, before we open up I'd really love to open up the space so that those people who are here can ask some questions. I'm hoping that one of those questions might be this one, and so I'll ask it. Would you please give a little shape or a little bit? Do you want to speak a little bit about the Soul's Journey Home, the actual retreat space that you offer, or would you like that to just unfold naturally over individual questions that might come toward you?
I think it probably can unfold because the nature of the weekend, it's an experiential weekend, so it's quite difficult even. And I always smile because Claire, when she went back to work, and I know this, Claire won't mind me sharing it either. When people ask, what did you do? It's very difficult to put words on it because it is very much an experience. And the whole weekend it's not about learning. We go out of that headspace. Of course we do a wee bit because we need to sort of set things up a little bit, but it's all about the experience and really inviting the energy of death to be with us throughout the weekend so that we can get a sense of it and a feel of it and learning how to be with that energy.
I get it.
I don't know what more to say.
Well, I'm looking forward to being in Donegal in a couple of weeks' time, straight off the islands of Scotland.
Yes.
So I would love to invite any of you. There was one question from Sonia. Am I right that the piece by John O'Donoghue was actually called For the Dying?
Yes.
It's the name. So Sonia, if you, rather than writing that down, or if somebody else, Gabriella, if you'd like to write it down, it's a piece by John O'Donoghue. Is it from Benedictus?
From Benedictus, yeah.
It's a stunning collection of John O'Donoghue's works. And actually, I think it was his last collection that came before his own death.
Before his, yeah.
At a time in his life, which many would say was quite early. I'm just getting familiar with his work at the moment. So that's the answer to that question. And also just wanted to say that I don't know whether you saw it, Moya, but Sonia said, I love the stillness and presence of you both. It's calming me. So in itself, being willing to speak in this way is kind of, in itself, there's a relax somewhere, yes?
Yeah.
So I'll sit back a little bit and see if anybody would like to speak directly to Moya.
I've got a question. Can I ask a question?
I don't think so, Louise, no.
Thank you. I'm curious, when you described your experience at the bottom of the swimming pool, whether you pulled yourself out of that or whether you were pulled out of that by somebody else.
Louise, I was pulled out by somebody else. I was pulled off the bottom of that pool. And I was physically pulled off the bottom of that pool, and I think energetically and emotionally pulled out of that pool too. Yeah. But what struck me was, you know, I had never experienced, and I was only a child, so it's on reflection, I had never experienced having gone beyond the struggle or the battle of maybe dying. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was serene. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. Because I've had near-death experience, and I'm conscious of the fact that I realised what was happening and I pulled myself out of it. So didn't get to that state of calm and peacefulness that you're describing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a very I'd like to add to that, actually. I've had two experiences in my life with a particular critter which have taken me very close to death, and in both instances I experienced some of these energies that Moya is speaking of, and I actually would say that there's even the potential for them to be alluring. They're so beautiful, to the point where if it hadn't been for another person in both instances demanding, you know, to be fully present with me, so that I had to make a choice in those moments, I would definitely not have chosen to leave what was a very seductive space of beyond peace, utter beauty. A particular quality lives there that well, if it could be bottled, it would make it more available. And you wouldn't have to go through the experience, but maybe that's a little bit more than should be said. There is a particular essence there, or quality there, that now that I have experienced it twice, I can make a choice around not having to experience it again unless it's a death process. But I can honestly say that there have been times in the last 12 months since the most recent near dying experience where I actively wondered whether I'd made the correct choice for my whole being. And it actually is much tougher to choose to stay in that moment. It requires a much more vigorous yes than I'd been willing to engage with before. And that's what continues to engage this kind of lively question of what is it to truly live, having met those energies. I mean, wow, and how can I, having met those energies so palpably, and found them not ugly, and found them not difficult, and found them not painful, how can I take that information, that experience, into my future and have it contribute so much more fully to others, to the creation of my own life? It's a rich space, Moya, huh?
Mm-hmm. And I think there's something in that as well, because, you know, I suppose it goes to our beliefs and what we believe happens after we die as well, and our experience of that, or our understanding of that. And sort of, I would be with you too, you know, and I see it in animals all the time, the transition to pass over is so much easier than we humans generally relate to that whole experience and transition. But yet for me, and it's over my years, and sort of death has informed me in this too. It's like how, on some level, spirit has chosen to be embodied in me as a human being. And maybe that's a greater experience than just pure spirit, because we actually have a physical body and we can create and we can interact and we can have choice and we can dance and we can, have the emotional experience too. But, and probably when I first started out, say, with meditation or on a spiritual quest, we always saw, the enlightenment and spirituality as being without the body, that the physical was somehow less than a pure spiritual experience. And at some point that flipped, and it's like, what if, this physical incarnation is somehow more evolved than just pure spirit? And I use evolution and evolved in a loose term because, they're interchangeable in a way. But maybe our spiritual essence through this body is having a greater experience because it can actually create and interact and make and do and feel and experience. I don't know.
I've got a lot to say to that. Does anybody else want to jump in before I take the space again? Oh, okay. I'll carry on. So when Maggie was in these exquisite last days of her life, really keen to get out, but not having to rush it, she's 96 years old. She's got a lot of pain. She was choosing to live with very few painkillers. It was a very, very conscious pathway she was creating. The most amazing gift was what my body was able to perceive of her body before her body could speak it. My body would tell me what it was that her body required as a physical, as a visceral gift. To the extent where this body, this incredible body, which I hadn't really acknowledged until that began the beginning of me acknowledging, wow, what an amazing gift of awareness this thing is, this amazing thing that I've been overlooking for years, actually abusing really through neglect. But she arrived, and this beautiful woman's body, all tiny and in pain, started to speak to my body beyond the thinking and saying when it was that she just would like a little touch. So that touch was something that she could actually receive something from. When it was that she required smell, I remember one day I knew after being with her in the morning, I knew to go. My body asked me to go outside in the King's Cross area where she lived and start to walk along these streets where the big terraced houses, the roses were in bloom. And this body told me, not me, my body told me to go and take a pair of scissors and ask the roses. The roses literally responded, come and pick me. Come and take me. Maggie's body was informing the entire process of what her body required. And those roses were so present. And the scent of those roses, when I arrived in the room, this little face that was just, well, what can I say? The gift of her being able to smell and sense what these flowers were contributing. It was as though she'd never smelt anything quite so beautiful. All of her senses were alive to the fact that these were physical experiences. The senses were so alive as her body was beginning to completely end its living process. This, to me, is the most profound mystery and so, so beautiful. And it was moment after moment where if I allowed my body, her body would be telling my body what she required. Physical.
And again, it goes back to that movement piece that we've spoken about, Heather, that, you know, and I often see in a lot of our work, and we speak about it on the weekend, it's find what moves. So what moves you, or what moves the person that you are with. And again, that may not be what we expect. You know, it might be the smell, it might be a particular touch, it might be a particular essential oil, it might be a particular piece of music, a particular reading or writing or scripture or whatever. But there's for me, I hear, even in what you say, there's a moving piece. What moved you?
Yes.
You know, the sunset, nature, flowers, as I say, the particular sort of music, and find that which moves you, and then allow the movement. Like the spirit and soul are moving in those latter days too. So tap into the things that we know help with the movement. That can be really, really useful. And again, not to go into our expectations. You know, I'm just thinking back to, I had one person who used to come to me for energy healing work, and usually we'd have probably quite calming music when we're working, but this person wanted dance music because it was the aspect of, you know, that trance dance that actually carried them and moved them somewhere so they could go beyond their physical being, and through all of their senses, as you were saying there so beautifully, through the senses go beyond the physical, and move into a more spiritual, soulful place. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, very interesting.
Really lovely. I'm glad you spoke about music. Yeah, I'm really glad you spoke about music just then. These singing bowls are asking to not to play because they don't translate so well through the live Zoom, but they're asking me to come forward a little bit more and say, how can we begin to be more fully present and engaged with
And this has been sitting beside me here, Heather.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, because it was very much coming to this conversation. And this is my singing bowl, singing bell, which way you choose to use it, that I made with Heather and Gabriella under their guardianship in May. And for me, and I suppose the work that I do, I started with the concept of this making and creating a bell that would be a sound that would carry us through that transition of death and the journey. But that went, as it does, over the weekend. That disappeared into the ethers. And this bell was the sound of source, and was to be the sound of source. And, you know, for me, that it brought everything home so beautifully. Because again, it is like, what is our journey? What is our journey home, or the soul's journey? It's a journey to source. And the other beautiful thing about this over the weekend, you know, it even went beyond this bell. It was, every sound is the sound of source. You know, that our voice is our sound of source, that music is a sound of source, you know, that we can create it with our bodies. So that was the wee journey of this wee one here. It's very powerful being.
When you say nothing small about it.
No. We is a term of endearment here in Ireland, Heather.
Yeah. E and all sorts of E's.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
But I think as well, you know, and I've used some of your music for those journeys, and you know, it's important to think of, you know, there are particular sounds, vibrations, frequencies that help with the movement and will help with the journey and the leaving of the body at that moment too.
Yeah, thank you very much for bringing that into the space. I will just speak a little about another personal story with regards how music contributes not only to the dying, but actually to the dead.
Yeah.
And to those that were in the space of the funeral, the music can be and is known to be something that really definitely goes beyond words, but can ease and create these, I'm going to call them threshold experiences. Gabriella and I were speaking about this just an hour and a half ago, as we were preparing for this conversation, and I'll bring you in, Gabri, but we were aware that over the years of us weaving together with our sounds, what is really clearly beginning to emerge is that we've been playing music for the threshold experience continually. And the threshold experience can be the small deaths, the little ones where we have to let something go and for something new to arrive. Or in the case of others, my sister perhaps, we directly experienced that a piece of music that came through us just before she died was being created over here and here in England, and she was in Australia. There's no question in our mind that that music came through to assist her passage and ease something of that journey for her. So that when it was actually played to my family after my sister had died, my brother, who had never really expressed anything about my music or my musical life in these recent years, he just looked at me in the face and he said, Heather, you and Gabriella should be taking this very seriously. You two could really do well to create music for funerals. And I have to be honest, I kind of laughed in that way of, wow, that's a big thing you're saying. And now I'm fully acknowledging how music, when it's crafted with the kind of openness to this space of the threshold, can be a huge, immense gift to assist people crossing over. And again, Bridget, it's in the space. There is, the midwife, the thresholds, the threshold experience. Gabri, will you speak to that?
Yeah, I would. I actually wanted to add the experience that I had with my mom when she was crossing over. I'd been on the other side of the world, and she was going really, really fast. And, it took me like 2 days of flying to get to her. And I was communicating with her inwardly for the whole journey. And when I got there, and I knew she was waiting. She was waiting. And I was just moved to sit and start to sing and sound. And within a really, really short time, she moved across. And it was like she moved across on the sound. And in a way that only two of us noticed it. And the others just were with the sound. And it was like, it was at the time, it was so perfect because the two that didn't notice her passing were the two that would have held her back. And so it was like the sound was actually assisting her to move. It was so beautiful. I was like, it stayed with me. It stays with me. And I remember you saying, Heather, that Maggie, who you talked about earlier, also, she just found such relief with when she heard the sounds.
Yeah.
Something else could occur. And it was like I had other experiences where people had were in trauma because a loved one had died a long way away. And I was moved to say, let's create a sound bridge for them. And we literally created a bridge of sound for the person for whatever they might require. And the peace that was able to occur from that was extraordinary for the person who was grieving, as well as for the whole space. So those are my little bits of experience here.
And I think that's really important to remember, Gabriella, what you were just saying. Like, even if we're not present, we're present as energy beings.
Yeah.
You know, so what we say, think, do, sing, sound ripples out across that sea of energy and will be felt and will have an impact. You know, and I've seen that time and time again, you know, that what we're doing maybe on the other side of the world is having an effect. And probably not to forget that. And again, that you know, we think very, very linearly, you know, so even we can send sound and energy and frequency, even if someone has passed, you know, that is still carried. And the other thing, just Heather, when you were speaking about the thresholds, I think it's important to remember that we have thresholds throughout our lives, little mini thresholds. I call them like the mini die-ins that we all have. But they're beautiful opportunities to practice.
Yes.
That may sound strange, but they're beautiful moments to practice. How do we die and let go, so that ultimately for when our biggest journey, our biggest dying, our biggest letting go, that we have some aspect of, okay, what helps, what moves us, what carries us, you know, where do I get caught, where do I get stuck, where do I need assistance, who can I ask to be with me that will push me through or carry me through. You know, those are moments, you know, and I'm sort of saying it in a jokey way, but they're key, and they're really important, that we don't get too bogged down about them. You know, everything is in preparation for our death, but those moments can so inform how we are in our living and in our dying. So they're special.
There's this marvelous quality available to us that actually we would often deny, which is the active acknowledgement. To acknowledge that we've been practicing for our death through these retransformations that we're undergoing all the time, to acknowledge that actually we already know what's required at any moment. Our bodies know, whether it's about death or whether it's about what they would like, our bodies will take us there. Yeah, acknowledge that, and how, yeah.
And again, to stay humble in all this, because there's no right or no wrong. You know, we will die regardless. You know, and there it is, you know, and not to get too caught up in it either, you know, to just allow that, the sinking and the movement and the flow. Not to get caught up in a technique or a process or a right or a wrong. You know, that there's just a free flow in this.
Interesting. The word right in this context wants to be an R-I-T-E.
Yes.
Right.
We'll create a rite. A ritual will evolve and emerge. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering whether we could create some. Let's create an invitation here. A conscious, energetic presence for the energies that we collectively, but particularly individually, actually, are willing to be, that we, you know, that we are willing to have access to in our own lives and living. And just allow those energies to be in the space and fully acknowledge that we do have what's required in any moment. And I wonder whether we might also offer some of that knowing up to those who might not in this moment or throughout time and space For there is this tendency to forget that actually there is a timeless field around death. There are many, many, many energies that are still unaware that they actually are dead. They're actually dead. And I was just wondering whether we might offer some of what we're willing to be here up as a contribution and make it available, that there is the possibility that there can be something that is not completely needing to be feared, needing to be resisted, needing anything. There is no need about it. It is one of the is's until such time as we create something different. And Moya, unless anybody else has another question or something that they would like to share into this space that I'm going to call a hearth space. Beautiful, Granya's just asked for something. I was going to suggest that we create a kind of bundle of energy and offer it up as a blessing to those that might actually receive that as a kind of a nourishment to assist them on the way.
There's a question that's just come in.
Yeah, so Grania asks, can you say something about how to speak with someone who fears their own death? Thank you, Grania. Have I said that correctly, Grania?
Yeah. Grania, yeah. Yeah, there's so many layers in that. And I suppose I would like to think that you possibly know this person. And for some people, fear, I see fear as an energy. And it's an energy that we can assist with. So it may not even be words. And sometimes this is, can we be present enough and be in a healing space enough to go beyond words? Because oftentimes words won't be heard, particularly if someone is very, very fearful. So are there other things that we can do to move this person out of an energy of fear? Would be sort of where I'm looking at, even not say this or do that, or, look at very much as an energy and how can we move this person beyond fear? And again, one of the main things here is our own state of being in our own presence, because if we're getting caught in the fear of somebody else and we're sort of getting anxious or worried about it, or we're going into fear about it, or we're worrying about it, that doesn't serve in the transmuting and changing of that fear. It actually holds it. So again, this is where we need to be in a calm, still space if we can at all be. And then I would be suggesting to look at ways of moving through that energy of fear. So again, what moves that person? Is it particular music? Is it a particular activity? Do they need touch? Do they need to be held? Do they need massage, essential oils? Do they need completion around some fear? Do you know that is there things that need to be said? Or things that need to be finished or completed, or the generating piece around that fear too. But even aside from, I think sometimes we can get caught too much in the words, and oftentimes words will never work. So is there another way of working with that and being with that energy? What I think it's sort of out of context, but yeah.
Beautiful, Moya. Really beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know whether you have anything to add, Heather.
Well, I just would really like to sort of speak to that place where once somebody is in the view that they are of the particular let's say that fear in this instance is like something that has been locked into place. You're absolutely right. How can we approach the fear?
Yeah.
As something that is not of itself. Like, I mean, my body wants to go to the whisper. It wants to go to the breath. It wants to go to just somehow easing the structure of what is the locked-in fear state into something that doesn't have to be faced full on to create the resistance, but a kind of the passage that would allow a little gentleness around those energies so that they could begin to soften. And the occasional whisper of another possibility just beginning to gain a stronger ground. Fear is always a lie somewhere. It's somewhere there's a lie there. And you're right, it can't always be addressed with, well, what is it you're scared of? Sometimes that's highly inappropriate. Other times it's okay. You're with a cognizant person that's willing to go, I'm done with that. The person who's dying is asking for what it is that your body and being knows in that instance that is not coming in from that same language that was part of the fully lived journey. There's something different being asked of you in that moment as well. And I have a sense that if we would look at what it is we might be in any instance resisting the most, it's going to be found there.
And I think, you so rightly say there, Heather, like, and I see it time and time again, and I saw it in past in my work. It can be a very cruel thing to make someone face head on fear, particularly in those last days, because it just brings up so much turmoil where we're trying to get into a place of stillness. And I suppose not to underestimate your ability, with an open heart and a compassionate heart, that just by being witness to that fear, that you can somehow have a transmuting, transformative impact on that energy. And I know this to be true, and this is, I suppose, work that we would do in shamanic realms as well. We can dance and navigate with that energy to soften it, as you were speaking about. But just by our presence and being can be enough to soften and let go a little bit, and not to underestimate that, like not to get caught on. It's not about saying the right words. It's the being and the softening, and not you being afraid to be present with that fear.
And being in the question, what energy can I be here? What energy can I be here that would allow this to change? There's no force, there's no need to fix or to heal or anything at certain points. But what energy can my body bring to this? That doesn't mean I take it out of them. I don't have to take it through them, but that I'm willing to show up with a range of willingness. And it just happens.
It does.
It will just happen. We do not need to think in that one.
No.
And
your whisper, that whisper that you speak about, it can be enough to remind someone, that they are more than. We're more than this physical being, but we're more than our acts or the things we've done or the things we're afraid of, or, maybe the not so good stuff that we've all done in the past. We're more than, and that can be a wee whisper. I often say it's like speaking to the soul on a spirit soul level, that you can just you see the potential of that being in all their beauty and love and compassion. And that in itself can just lessen that hold of whatever emotion that could be causing problems. Yeah.
Thanks so much for this question.
That goes some way to answer. I know it's not a direct answer, but
there is
just ideas.
Beautiful. Gronya, do you want to say anything? Unmute yourself. If you don't know how to unmute yourself.
Yeah, no, I'm here. Thanks. Hi, Moya. How are you?
Oh, Gronya, how are you? It's Gronya that I know.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I suppose what you've been saying is really, really interesting, and I'm conscious myself at the moment that my mum is quite elderly, and And while she hasn't necessarily spoken of it, I'm conscious that there's a fear there. And there's a fear, I know, particularly a fear because she lives alone, of dying alone, of falling perhaps and dying alone. She mentioned to somebody there recently that she's trying to survive on her own, you know. And I suppose really it's sort of what to say in that instance, and how to be with her, or if there was anything practical. I understand and hear you in terms of your own presence being a calming influence and factor in just being present. But for somebody who has that fear of what it might be like to die on their own, and I think it's a huge, big question, and I probably don't have time for it now, but I think it is something that a lot of people would be particularly concerned about.
And again, it goes back to what we spoke about right at the very beginning as well, that, you know, wouldn't it be so beautiful if we have someone with us that can accompany us on that journey, you know, that we're not alone. And it's a very difficult one, and it's a very real situation. I suppose in our population at the moment, there's an aging population who, you know, I think they're called them elderly orphans, because there's people who are maybe don't have people living with them, so that are very much alone. And I think that goes to societal concerns too. And the other thing I'm very conscious of is the language, and I see it here in Ireland a lot, I suppose, we're, you know, primarily a Catholic country, and I see it sort of my mum's generation, and there can be very emotive language used, both in the prayers and in our liturgies, and about, you know, I'm not worthy to be admitted to heaven, and, you know, please forgive me, and all of that language is very emotive too. And if we can start teasing that out at an earlier stage, you know, it can lessen the fears. You know, my mum, we don't talk about things because then they won't happen. That's our family sort of dynamic. And my mother sort of, you know, but there's moments that we can weave in conversations around, you know, maybe what she'd like at funerals, and, you know, there's sort of openings that way. And I suppose for me at the moment, you know, unfortunately my mum's off that age that some of her peers are deteriorating or dying, but it gives then moments of opening for conversations that can be had, like what would you like, you know, where do you want to be, like, and I've had those sort of conversations with my mum. And I think, Grania, it's a bigger conversation, and it's a societal one too.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you.
What you say, Moya?
The dogs are barking in the background.
The dogs are actually...
The dogs are fast asleep beside me here. Carol has slept throughout.
Dogs go somewhere else.
So I feel we probably have come to a natural point where this particular conversation ends. I would be more than willing for Tina to have contact with any of you at any point along the way if you had any ideas to bring towards me or to Moya. I feel we're at the beginning of conversations that want to happen more. There are organizations like death cafes and various other ways to bring, you know, the thing that may have been a taboo for many, just a little bit more out into the open. And I celebrate the experiences with the death energies that I've been, I'm going to say privileged to have been with, but I celebrate your work, Moya. I celebrate your ability and capacity to craft something that can be a rich offering for the living as well as the dying. And wow, just thank you for making this space available to us. And we will publish this on, I presume on Moya's site, tranquilpaths.com. I hope so anyway. I'm going to definitely publish it on Resounding Earth, which is the beautiful business that I share with Gabriella, and Janine is also a co-creator with, and Viola is also a co-creator with, and to have conversations is great.
We can also post it underneath the event.
Oh yes, we will, definitely. For those of you who came to us through Facebook, if you'd like to just acknowledge the conversation in some way or share it, please, if that's okay with you, Moya.
Absolutely, yeah. And Heather, I want to say a big thank you to you, because you invited this conversation, and it was one that probably was brewing and wanting to be voiced. And those that know me, I wouldn't have done that on my own. So thank you for giving me the nudge in.
Yeah. Part of my enticement is that if there's something that's not being completely made available that I sense a bit of treasure in, I will do my very best to kind of ease it out. And you're a treasure walking, Moya. So hey, let it out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And maybe you spoke earlier about just having a moment of just maybe us bringing our energy and understanding to the greater whole, and maybe just to invite that again, Heather.
Yeah, I would love it. And although the sound won't carry as well as I would like, there was a particular bowl that asked not to be packed on our journey to go to Scotland tomorrow, this one. And I said to Gabriella, well, which one is this? And she said, it's my healing bowl. So I would just love to offer this bowl up and the energies of conscious creation that it was crafted with through Gabriella, through all of the energies that have lived through it and from it, and make these vibrations available to a field of being more consciously willing and present with the energies of life. Yeah. So if there are any people that you know at this time, and I think some of us here know of a particular person, but if there are any other lives that you know who are actually not so comfortable or are walking in great comfort, let's hold them in our hearts and awareness. Across the waters, from County Leitrim to Lancashire in the heart of England, to those of you in the future that will get to share this conversation in different ways, and to those of you who have come from different nations and different lands, thank you so very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Oh, Matakuya-san, we are all related. Thank you so much, Miss Moya.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Wow. Beautiful.